Today we are doing another episode of the CogniVerse, a really exciting episode as we have Chris here today to share his words of wisdom. And if you wouldn't mind, Chris, just giving a bit of a background on, who you are, what you've been up to most recently, and why you wanted to actually talk on the CogniVerse today.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know how much wisdom it will actually be, but I'll do my best. So my name is Chris Riley. My current role is as a senior manager at HubSpot, which is a large software company that has a CRM and a CMS used for marketing automation, et cetera. I lead a team in DevRel, which is a very unique function in the tech space. It's equivalent to like an engineering team, but we serve as like a conduit between external developers and our internal product team, and we engage with them. I've been in tech my whole career. I refer to myself as a bad coder turned developer advocate, and this will get quickly to why I like doing these sorts of talks. I wasn't a great software developer. I think the details, I loved software development, but I was not a great software developer. Like I was really good at building prototypes, but when it came down to bug fixes, I had zero patience for it, which is actually also part of neurodiversity in a way. But I couldn't let go of it. I mean, software development is in my blood. It's something I'm very passionate about. And so my career evolved with this role, developer relations, about 15 years ago when it became an official thing. So even prior to DevRel being an official thing, I was sometimes doing sales, I was sometimes doing support, I was sometimes doing marketing, I was sometimes doing development. Like it was across the board. And that's kind of what developer advocacy has become, is it's like this confluence of all these functions that are targeted towards software developers. And born and raised in Colorado, went to the Bay Area for about 18 years, recently moved back, not all that recently, about 6 years ago, moved back to Colorado. I'm excited to have this conversation. You asked, why do I do these? So one of the big jobs of a developer advocate, especially pre-COVID, is to speak. I used to speak at a trade show every week, almost, prior to COVID. That's changed significantly. As a matter of fact, I did more speaking during COVID because virtual events made it so easy. One year I did 68 virtual events.
Wow.
Now, the topics I would speak on are all software related, tech related. So DevOps and logging and error monitoring and all of that stuff. But because I had that skill set of speaking, and I was passionate about neurodiversity, I think that the fear of going to see a therapist, the stigma surrounding all the mental disorders, really I was obligated, I felt like, to have the conversation, because what I started to realize, it is actually the stigma that causes a bunch of problems. The stigma will prevent people from getting the proper help that they need and being the best that they can be, with whatever they're living with. It allows people to treat others differently, but never address it head on. So never have a conversation about things that are bothering them. So they just let it fester and they treat people differently as a result. And so I truly believe if we normalize the conversation and not make things like autism and bipolar feel so scary and taboo, then it'll be better for everybody, neurotypical, neurodiverse, everybody. And so that's why I do it.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's really interesting. And something that you touched upon was you were a software engineer or software developer, and now your role has evolved a lot. I think a lot of people, well, one of my questions would be, how did you get from that point to figuring out this role was going to be much better for you? and it's just, obviously it's still within tech, but it's a much different role
Right.
to, you know, your bog standard engineer role. So yeah, how did you get there,
Yeah,
I guess?
I'll tell you, like, the area of DevRel is super fascinating, and the growth in that area is super fascinating. I would love to tell you it was deliberate. It was not at all. What ended up happening is, so I had a tech startup in Colorado that I eventually sold to a company in California, which is what moved me to California. And in a tech startup, especially when it's yours, you do everything. I did sales. I did actual customer. It was a managed service provider for like tech support, and we were building some software at the same time. So I did everything with a very small team, and I got very used to that. So I went into this, established software company, Abby, which is one of the first OCR engines out there. And I went in, and they didn't even know what to do with me. They knew that they had to do something with me, but they didn't really know what to do with me. So initially, where they put me was sales engineering, which is like, like a combination of engagement and on a very deeply technical side. And because they were selling an SDK, that worked really well. So I engaged with customers really well. Turns out I was able to close some deals. So now that they're thinking, oh, maybe he can do sales. And then eventually we would have a customer come with a really hard technical problem that required a lot of creativity. Like, it just wasn't an out of the box typical problem. And I got fascinated with the problem, and I built a solution for it. So now I'm suddenly providing professional services and support. That went on for a really long time. Oh, and then we would run into a scenario where there was an analyst who wanted to understand the technology deeper, but nobody in our marketing team was able to speak to it. So I would be the one to speak to it.
Right.
So
Okay.
I continued to dabble in all these areas, and I happen to love all of them. The sales part, I don't know, maybe the least. I like to talk, but the sales part, maybe the least. The commission aspect of sales, I did not love. This was all before DevRel existed. And as a matter of fact, DevRel itself is probably only 5 years old, 6 years old. But the function came from what was tech evangelism. Guy Kawasaki wrote his book, Art of the Start, about, I think, 15 or 16 years ago. I'd have to look it up to get the exact dates. And after he wrote that, the VCs in the Bay Area, all the big VCs, came onto this idea of tech evangelism. So Guy Kawasaki was like considered one of the original tech evangelists. As soon as that happened, a lot of startups started hiring tech evangelists. It was a brand new function. That came after. And so what was interesting is I was already kind of doing the role, and then I grew into it as these startups grew into it, because I moved into a lot of Bay Area startups, VC funded startups, and tech evangelism went into developer advocacy because the nomenclature around evangelism wasn't well accepted, which evolved into a broader function, which we now call DevRel. And the reason that happened is because there's other components to DevRel. There's community, there's events, there's partnerships, those types of things, which now get rolled into this function as well. So I didn't invent DevRel, but I can say that I was a part of the evolution. And it is even though it's been around for, say, 15, 16 years, it is a fairly niche function in large tech companies. I do have a book on developer advocacy that was recently published, and a few.
Amazing! Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. It's a lot of work, but yeah, it was an important win for me, and a few courses on DevRel with the Developer Marketing Alliance. But still, it's still fairly niche, but I don't think it's going away. It's a very important function for large tech companies who engage with developers.
Definitely. Yeah, it feels very new, I will say. From just being generally in the tech industry, I come from obviously a recruitment background, which is sales to some degree, isn't it? So it's that sort of environment. But being an AI recruitment consultant, you are just seeing a lot of new things evolving all the time and new job titles evolving all the time. And it is a case that a case of like kind of being like, okay, which one's going to be here for the long haul? What ones are going to maybe get changed and twisted or maybe not exist in a year's time? So it is interesting. It's also kind of from your perspective, that sort of role, you're really at the ultimately in the grand scheme of things, it's still at that sort of infancy in a way. And so a lot of what you're doing is trial and error and what works and how can we develop this further. So it's really cool to see that you've kind of put your learnings into a book, because ultimately it's like knowledge sharing is the only way it's going to grow and evolve out. Definitely.
Yeah, the titles in the AI space remind me a lot of the Hadoop days and the data science days, because the same, maybe not as many titles, but the same sort of thing happened at that tech wave. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess why we're kind of here today and what we're talking about was sort of the neurodiversity and neuroinclusion piece. And coming from your background, being in pretty much every area of a tech company to some degree, and living in San Francisco as well, where that's like still a huge tech hub, if not the biggest tech hub in the States. What kind of drew you to this topic, and on the other side of that, what are some of the hurdles that you've seen with regards to, you know, being neurodiverse or neurodivergent in this industry itself?
Yeah, this is there's a lot to unpack in this question, by the way, so I'll do my best.
I tend to do that.
to synthesize this. Well, first of all, I wouldn't have my career as it is without I am in my role because I am neurodiverse. I guess, you know, as I alluded to before with software development, like my challenge with details, we'll say, is also the reason why I tend to bounce around a lot from this is exciting, this is exciting, this is exciting. But I guess before I say that, I should say, what are my diagnoses? My official diagnoses are ADHD combined, so that's inattentive and hyperactivity, autism level 1 with sensory avoidance and low registration, and dyslexia. So there's a lot there. They're all essentially the same thing. Like the nucleus of all of that is coming from the same general place in my brain. The dyslexia, interestingly enough, made communication for me very challenging. And as a result, I would find new ways to gain information. Well, that's where my creativity came from, because I had to be super creative on how I learned about things. I couldn't, yes, I can read, but I wouldn't read things in detail, and my comprehension wouldn't always be fantastic. So I could read something and get a sense of what's going on, but I'd have to talk to people and I'd have to observe. And so as a result, that behavior is a bit scattered, which reflects in kind of how I operate. It's a bit scattered sometimes. But that benefits me. That's exactly why I am able to deliver a unique perspective on things such as building a prototype for a customer, for a net new use case that nobody's ever thought about. I am able to understand the technical details without being an expert in the technical details, and have a conversation about it and write blog posts about it and go to trade shows and speak about it. And so that is a unique aspect. Also, you know, obviously hyperactivity, inattentiveness. You know, I go where the dopamine is, and dopamine hits come from solving really hard problems for me. But once the problem's solved, I'm out. And that's kind of a big thing of advocacy in DevRel. It's like, go in, solve the problem, and get out. And that's something I really love about the role. I am now in a management role, which I absolutely love. And I think this gets to the second dimension of your question is what is the challenge of other folks at, embracing and why do this?
Yeah.
I had a massive existential crisis when I decided to go into management. And I think this happens for a lot of technical folks where it's really, really hard. First of all, being a manager is a completely different job. It's not an extension of your previous job. It's a new job.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just like take what you know and then add to it. Like it's different. Now, your knowledge of the previous job helps you in management, but it's a different job. And my existential crisis was I was really good at speaking at events. I had, in the space of enterprise content management, I had gained a following. I was recognized. Now I hardly show up at all.
Right.
I was writing a blog post a day and I was all over the place. And now I'm kind of like silent in the corner a little bit. But the reason I love management is the mentorship, the personal development side. And a big part of that gets to exactly why I do this. I've always been a believer in therapy. My mental health journey started at the age of 17, where I was misdiagnosed with OCD, which is a very common misdiagnosis with autism. Yeah. And I've seen how much bad therapy and medical advice is out there, which I think is on the line of malpractice, like really bad. I've seen folks being so timid of therapy and like it's admitting failure and all of this stuff. And I want to put the energy out there. It's like, this is no different than going to the doctor. This is just taking care of yourself, whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse. And the discoveries you will find are absolutely life-changing. And I haven't stopped, even from the age of 17 to now. This last year has been a massive shift in my understanding of my childhood. And why I have I don't think it'll show up on video, my inner child tattoo. This is
that's awesome. I can see it. Yeah.
So because inner child work is some of the hardest stuff you'll ever do in your life, but it is remarkable what happens when you do. And so I think what's interesting is that when you are a lot of times when you're autistic, the pursuit of truth and information is more important to you than the pain or struggles of getting to that information. Right. So I much rather deal with very painful conversations with my therapist about childhood abandonment than not have the information. I want the information. I want to know. And that's really an attribute of like the autism side. And I think that's why I dive so deep into it. But the rewards are phenomenal. And I just think that I want to encourage people not to shy away from that. When I got my autism, the talk I recently gave internally at HubSpot to our engineering team, and it's also published on our developer YouTube, was the day I got my official diagnosis. And that process, that 4-hour-long process of 2 psychiatrists, 4 written tests, was one of the most awful experiences in my life. It was horrible. But I'm so happy that I did it. So it's just, leaning into those challenges, what you get on the other side of it is remarkable. And I just want to encourage other people to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess for a lot of the people that you are speaking to, you'll almost be like a mentor for those people or someone to aspire to. Because you've gone on, by the sounds of it, you've had a long journey with this. This isn't an overnight thing where, now I want to start talking about this. This has been a really long journey and you've had to put a lot of work in to get to where you are now. Did you have anyone that you worked with or, even, you know, a celebrity maybe that you kind of had as a mentor or someone you were like, right, I wanna get there, because sometimes it can be
Geez.
quite a lonely place.
That's true, and but I think it's unfortunate that that's true, because I think especially American culture has taught us to not show weakness, and I
Yeah.
despise that about our culture.
Yeah.
I yeah, I have a fairly cliche person that I admire, who I think was neurodiverse. I don't know, but he was a figure that was important to me my entire life, and the day he died was very difficult for me. And I know that it's a bit cheesy, but Steve Jobs.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that is fairly cliche, but there is somebody else, Richard Feynman, who's one of the I wasn't alive when he was alive, and I feel very sad about that. The reason I was so fascinated with Richard Feynman is because the things that he did in the world of physics were tremendous. Physics is a world that intentionally, kind of like the medical world, intentionally pushes people out. Like they make it a members only club. Like, if you can't do the equation, you can't hang out with us.
Yeah.
And Richard Feynman did not he did not accept that at all. You can find some of his lectures on YouTube, and they're amazing. And he truly believed, like, before you know the equation, like, you need to understand how things manifest in the real world. Now, in the area of quantum physics, that's very, very difficult. And physics is another thing that I'm very passionate about. But Richard Feynman is, again, I don't know if he was neurodiverse. If he wasn't neurodiverse, he's like on the cusp of, like, with his brilliancy. I wouldn't say, and I don't know that aspiring to follow in the footsteps of somebody is necessarily all that great. I'll say that I've had mentors in my career who now I once respected and now I do not. And the reason I say that is because one of the biggest challenges in my discovery of neurodiversity is facing masking and facing how much I masked. And I am really good at masking, to the point that I can identify a person that's very successful in one particular way and assimilate all of their skills. It's like downloading all of their skills and deliver the same back to the world. But later in my life, I realized I did that with some not great people, like folks that I probably should not have learned to mask, because my behaviors, especially in the world of sales, my behaviors were not great. They worked, but they were not great. And so masking is something we all mask. We will all always mask. When you have a particular goal you want to accomplish, you may mask to get to that goal. That's not the problem. But when it starts to become your identity and you don't know the difference between when you're masking and when you're not masking, I was surprised when I realized, like, even when I already deeply understood what masking was, that I realized, oh, I'm still doing it and I don't like it. And so that's also where I think I feel very comfortable in management, is because I still obviously mask sometimes, but not nearly what I used to. And I'm more my true self. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just with that, you're a manager now, and like you said, you've had some experiences before where managers, may they be your mentors, they did not foster, by the sounds of it, an inclusive environment, by the ways that they were potentially acting or what they were doing in order to kind of get a sale, let's say. Now that you're in that boat of, I'm a manager, and you're aware that people might be masking you potentially, or like understanding your traits and trying to kind of do the exact same thing, how do you foster that inclusive environment and also, do your job at the same time? How do you make that balance?
Well, Anna, you just asked me a question that I like. That is very rare to get a question where I'm like, oh, geez, I hadn't thought about that. The question you asked, I'm like, I never thought about that. Is what happens if folks end up masking from like my behaviors? I don't know. I have to think about that some more. I think I pride myself in being myself. I pride myself in being very genuine. The times in which the characteristics of Chris become like a topic of conversation at work, where it's like I'm like the quirkiness is now a thing. I think is both humorous and, you know, a sign that like I tend to always bring myself.
Yeah.
The thing I can't answer in that question. So I guess what I'm saying is, hopefully, if I'm bringing myself, there's good and bad that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the very least, it's me.
Yeah.
And
authentic.
it's not an ulterior motive.
Right.
So I guess if the genuine is masked, then I'm okay with that. Because that wouldn't be masking, I guess. Ooh, that's a quandary. Okay. Management. So in fostering an inclusive place. So this is something that I think is really important, that I don't know is all that complicated, but for whatever reason, a lot of companies cannot figure this out.
I agree.
The first one is, I guess I'll say, creating a safe space. So I think having a place where neurodiverse folks, no matter their title, because that's where it gets kind of iffy, can have a conversation about you know, what their challenges in life and how they're facing. And the interesting thing about the previous question you said was like, in my work life, my neurodiversity actually is an asset. In my personal life, it's been a serious challenge. And I'm facing it right now. I'm in the middle of a divorce, which I hope does not continue. Like, that's my ultimate goal. But neurodiversity is a component of that.
Sure.
At work, I have a lot of peers. I have a lot of folks that I can relate to and have conversations with, and having a safe space like we do at HubSpot, where we can have those conversations, and your title does not matter. If you enter the door, your title is gone. Like, your seniority is gone. It's just a conversation about the challenges you're facing. That is important, number one. Protecting that space is difficult, very difficult, because in theory, you should be able to allow anybody and everybody into the space, allies, etc. But for those who are not yet prepared to leave their judgment at the door, not qualified to enter the space, I would say. So it's a hard thing to manage. But here's some more simple things. These are pretty simple too. When you hire somebody, you obviously think they're talented.
Right.
So you hire them for a reason, because you believe in their ability to execute in some particular function. I hope that as the person hiring, you believe in your interview skills and you believe your ability to pick high quality talent. So let them do their job. The thing that a lot of companies do is they hire people to do a job, and then they tell them how to do the job, versus letting them do the job. Like, obviously people are increasing their skill set. Like, you might come in as an associate level and then move into a senior level and then a management level, whatever it is. Like, your skills will get better. But when you hire somebody, you're hiring them for the talent that they have. Yeah. And I think a lot of times organizations focus on how people work versus the work that they do. All that matters is the work that they do. All that matters is the work that they deliver. Now, I shouldn't say all, by the way, because I'm not stripping out culture. Like, they need to be effective with their team. They need to be able to communicate. They need to be humble. Like, you know, I'm not talking about lone wolf situation.
Sure.
Which is a lot in tech. What I'm saying is what they deliver, which is the quality of their work on time, is more important than if they are sitting down at a desk, or if in a meeting they need to turn off the camera and pace, or, whatever. Like, those things are how they operate. We don't need to think about how folks operate. We need to think about the work that they do.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'd say is making it okay to disclose. I've disclosed to my entire team. I've disclosed to my entire company. I've published podcasts of me talking about this. I will be sharing this podcast. Like, I am not hiding anything about my disclosures. We have a document called Working With Me inside of HubSpot. It's like a document where you can put your pet peeves and how you like to work, what works well for you, what doesn't work well for you. If you want to disclose there, you can, and I did. And so making your work feel like a safe enough place that you can disclose, I think, is a really big deal.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that idea, actually. It's one I haven't heard about, Working With Me, and because it gives you,
it's great.
Yeah, the safety of, if you feel as though I just want to say this, I just want people to be aware and it's off my chest, which I feel like I would feel. I just want to get it off my chest and not have to keep mentioning it. It's there if you want it, but it's not something I have to keep going around circles with. But at the same time, there's no pressure to do that. So it's nice.
And just a small comment on that, because I sometimes I forget this. When I started deciding to speak on neurodiversity, I was worried. Even being the person that I am, who's very open book, I was worried. It's when I was working at Splunk, which is a large logging developer tooling company, and they just created their Slack channel for neurodiversity. Just created it, and I went in that Slack channel, and I typed one message, which was my diagnosis. In the act of sending that message to hundreds of my peers, some of which I didn't even know, changed everything for me. So just the ability to do that and be like, I'm not going to get fired, because it was one of their standard DIMB programs. So they have to allow me to do this. So like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to get fired. I just hit a send button on something that is very sensitive and somewhat scary. And I still know I'm not going to face consequences for this. That is amazing. That changed everything.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be, it's so big, isn't it, to say it for a lot of people. And it's like, now that, with I do think is that to a degree, age and experience and life experience, you are just a little bit more like, right, most of the time you're like, well, take me or leave me, a bit of that. But when you put yourself back in that position of like the first time, it's so daunting and so freeing all in one, I think. It's probably the scariest but best thing you'll do in terms of work. And sometimes, when you're so far into these discussions and, you've had your career and you have had your successes and you feel more confident in yourself, it's harder to look back on that former you and go, oh my gosh, that was so brave, to even do that. So yeah, I think that's amazing. And I really like those ideas. Those are things I definitely want to share, because I think that can make a world of difference for a lot of people. And I guess just kind of, because I could talk to you all day, definitely. You're that sort of person for me that we could just have this conversation all day. But I guess just to kind of come to a close, and we're talking about those first steps for you, what would you say to someone watching this right now who hasn't, either gone to say, I'm going to actually go get this checked out, and I want to kind of get some answers on why I feel this way, or why I feel potentially different in some of my behaviours. So someone really at the start of their journey with this, what would your advice be based on your experiences?
Yeah, I wish I had like a snappy like one-liner that just made everybody cry and like go and find it. I did like, first of all, I'll say finding a good therapist. what I've come to learn is there's more bad therapists than there are good therapists. So finding a
Sure.
good therapist, somebody who specializes in neurodiversity, is very important. I would say if that is not on their profile, and this is something you want to have a conversation about, that's a problem, because there's a lot of judgment. There is a lot of, especially for women, there is a lot of situations like, nah, you're fine. Like, no, you've gotten this far. How could you possibly? When I was a kid, I was agoraphobic and I could never go outside. And you look at me now, somebody who stands on stage and speaks to people at trade shows, completely different person. So that is not fair, because where the physiological disorders show up is in childhood, not as an adult. A lot can happen, to your point. Like I've been very good at getting the tools to be successful because I am a opportunist. I always go after the opportunity. So finding a good therapist. When you think about therapy, it's not admitting weakness, it's not admitting fault, it's nothing like that. It's refinement, it's a conversation. Everybody, if I could force people to go to therapy, there's many people I would do force to go to therapy, because it is such a necessary part of just living in a very complex world, in a world where technology is surpassing our ability to comprehend how we're going to use it. Like it's, and the stress levels are through the roof, and like all of this nonsense that's going on, that is sad and disappointing. So everybody needs therapy. I tend to not like using the word disorders. I tend to like to think in terms of, I am living with these things. I believe they're my superpower in my talk, and a lot of folks have started using this term neurospicy. I think I am my best when I'm neurospicy. Sure, there's consequences that come from it. I face it all the time, but those consequences can either be funny or annoying, but they are less impactful than the benefit that my neurodiversity has provided me. I think the value that I've delivered to friends and other people. So I think looking at it as a weakness, if you can reframe that and think about, what are the things that I am now able to do that are unique and special because of this, and how can I leverage those instead of treating it as like a weakness or a failure. And there's a big difference between physiological mental disorders and what I will call more like sociological, like narcissism and borderline personality disorder, et cetera. And it is important, I think, to even for yourself, like understand the relationship of how those things play together. Because if you are also facing trauma, like I was from my childhood, that also impacts stuff. And addressing that trauma, honestly, I probably if I had known younger, like I wish I addressed the trauma first and more completely before facing the neurodiversity stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was amazing. And for anyone that might want to chat to you or reach out to you about this, how can people find you, or how would you prefer to be contacted if people were to contact you?
I think, to simplify, LinkedIn is probably the best place. It's also where I like to showcase. And what's funny is it was part of my job to show up on Twitter /X and LinkedIn. Like that was like, I was measured by that, and now I hardly ever show up. So I'm a bit embarrassed by my social presence these days, but LinkedIn is the best place to start a conversation. And please do. These are my favorite conversations to have. And so I don't shy away from that. But yeah, I think that's the easiest way.
Amazing.
So Chris Riley on LinkedIn, or I think I have like one of the coolest LinkedIn handles, where it's /DevRel. I think
you coined it.
Yeah, I forget how to get, but anyways, I'm fairly easy to find on there, and love to chat with anybody who wants to.
Amazing. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. That was really, really awesome.
Yep, thank you.